The side lateral raise is a staple exercise for any workout goal, even for those with a health condition. So let's do a deep dive into this shoulder exercise. Hi everyone, and welcome to Exercise for Health, and welcome to a new series where I break down a particular exercise to provide you with a comprehensive guide on how to perform it with correct technique, as well as look at some common mistakes people make, adaptations that may be required for certain health conditions, and we will also look at some variations you can try once you've mastered the main movement. As this will be a very lengthy video due to the detailed nature of it, I've placed timestamps for the chapters in the description below. This first episode will be analysing the side lateral raise, one of the most commonly used exercises that works the deltoid muscle, a thick triangular shaped muscle of the shoulder, and predominantly the middle or lateral head on the side. It's also assisted by the trapezius muscle on the upper back, the supraspinatus, which is one of the four rotator cuff muscles deep in the shoulder, and the serratus anterior muscle situated between the ribs and shoulder blade. The movement is an abduction of the shoulder joint, and it is an isolated exercise, meaning it focuses on a small muscle group with only one joint moving throughout the action in most part, this being the shoulder. However, other muscles in the body have to activate to help with stability, therefore it can still make you feel breathless when performing it. The side lateral raise can be done seated or standing, which makes it more versatile for people with a chronic health condition, and it's an exercise that doesn't need a lot of resistance if performed correctly. You can do the exercise with just the weight of your arms, with dumbbells or alternative hand weights such as water bottles that you might have at home. It can be done with a resistance band or therapy band, and if you have access to a gym facility, it can be done on a cable machine or even a specific lateral raise machine if they have one. To perform the technique correctly, it's important that you get the setup right first. If you're standing, then the most common position is to stand with your feet a shoulder width wide and have the body remain upright, which is fine. However, I prefer to adopt a staggered stance where I can lean the body forward slightly on an angle with the back leg straight and ensuring that I keep a neutral spine. This position will help free up some space in the shoulder joint during the exercise because it will lead you to externally rotate the shoulder slightly to lift the weight up. So this start position is highly recommended if you have anywhere of your rotator cuff, which will be most people over the age of 60. It may not be the best position though if you suffer with lower back problems or have a very weak core, in which case you may prefer to stand upright. If you're seated, then ideally you want to be able to lean the torso forward slightly in the same way as standing, but be careful not to bend forwards from the lower back. It should be a hip hinge, so your spine remains in its natural curve. If you are in a gym and have an adjustable bench, then you can sit on it backwards so that you rest your chest or head against the backrest that's at a slight angle. You could also use it for the standing version as well, as it will probably provide more stability to the torso. If you find getting into this position difficult or uncomfortable, then just maintain a good upright posture before starting, or use the upright backrest of a chair or bench to stabilize your body against, which will help you more if you suffer with low back pain. Once you've set your stance or seated posture, you then need to set your shoulder girdle to the right position before lifting. To do this, start with setting your shoulders down away from your ears. This will discourage the activation of the trapezius muscles on the top of the back to initiate the movement. You can also set the shoulder blades back a bit. They don't have to be consistently depressed and retracted or forced down and squeezed back together throughout the whole movement, as you may find this unnatural and awkward. But certainly be conscious of not allowing the shoulders to roll forwards or shrug up towards your ears, as this will limit your movement and space in the shoulder joint. In addition, your elbows should be slightly bent and they should remain slightly bent throughout the entire movement. Once you have this set, you're almost ready to begin. So take a deep breath in first and then breathe out as you start to lift. For good form, start with a 6-second repetition. This is 2 seconds to lift as you breathe out, a 1-second pause at the top of the movement, and then 3 seconds to lower back to the start as you breathe back in, ready for the next rep. However, this is just one method of tempo, and there are many ways of performing the speed of the movement. As you are lifting the arms, think as though you are trying to push the arms out away from the body, akin to reaching out to touch the walls. And the arms will raise closer to the scapular plane than the frontal plane if looking from above, meaning they don't have to end up directly out at the side of the body at the end of the movement. Also, if looking from the front or in a mirror, the shoulder, elbow and wrist joints will be in alignment at the end of the motion at around 90 degrees. It's not necessary to take the arms any higher than being perpendicular to the ground, as the deltoid muscle activation begins to diminish after reaching the end of range of the shoulder joint abduction at around 120 degrees. Beyond this point, the upward rotation movement of the shoulder blade takes precedence, meaning other muscles are activated more and the exercise becomes less effective for the deltoid. Another interesting fact is that during the abduction of the shoulder movement in a side lateral raise, the supraspinatus does the majority of work in the first 30 degrees, at which point the deltoid then takes over as the prime mover until you get to 120 degrees. Furthermore, the upper arm or humerus externally rotates at the shoulder joint during the exercise to allow for a more fluid movement of the rotator cuff muscles in the shoulder joint by increasing what's called the subacromial space. This will help reduce the risk of tendinopathy or impingement of the rotator cuff muscles. This will happen naturally, so you shouldn't have to think about it too much, but if you do get a pain deep in the shoulder while lifting near the top of the movement, you may have to assist the rotation a bit more by having your thumbs pointing forwards and up slightly and your elbow pointing backwards and down slightly to reduce it. I should point out that this exercise does not need a heavy resistance. In fact, I've been training in gyms for 35 years, and this is one of the exercises where I'd use one of the lighter weights. If I do this exercise with a 5 kilogram or 11 pound weight, for me that's more than enough to work the muscle effectively after 10 reps with strict form. So you may find that with only a small weight or resistance, it will be enough to challenge you to do the exercise correctly. Now you know how to perform the technique, let's look at the common mistakes people make when performing this exercise. Firstly, and probably the most common one, is additional movements to assist the lifting of the weight. I've seen countless numbers of people rock their body forwards and backwards during a movement, or even do some calf raises while lifting. This isn't necessary and is likely to be a result of the person trying to lift too heavy. I'm not saying it doesn't happen at the end of a set if you're going for complete failure for big time gym goers, but for the majority of my audience on this channel, you'll get more benefit from doing the exercise strictly throughout. If you engage your stabilizing muscles of your core correctly before performing the action, the only movement you'll see is the arm being raised and everything else remains rock solid still. Many beginners will lock out their elbows during the lift, so although you're thinking about reaching your arms outwards as you lift, ensure that the elbows remain slightly bent at all times throughout the movement. However, an excessive bend of the elbow and leading the lift with the hands is also a common mistake. This can lead to people performing external shoulder rotations rather than a shoulder abduction or proper side lateral raise, meaning that the rotator cuff does most of the work and not the deltoid. Another problem with having the elbow bent to 90 degrees to lift a heavier weight is that more stress is placed upon the rotator cuff muscle group because you add another lever to the movement from the elbow to the wrist, where the weight is now acting to internally rotate your shoulder. So to reduce the injury risk to the shoulder, use a lighter weight with the standard longer lever and keep the wrist, elbow and shoulder in alignment throughout the movement. Similar to the last one, some people internally rotate their shoulder as they lift, so their thumbs point down and their little pinky finger leads the lift, a bit like pouring water out of a jug. As mentioned in the technique part, this will reduce the space in the shoulder and push your shoulder forwards, therefore adding to impingement of the rotator cuff muscles, which over time will lead to shoulder injury or pain. So if you're unsure, always think thumbs up slightly higher, as this will reduce the risk of tendinopathy. The last common mistake is shrugging the shoulders during the movement, especially to initiate the lift. Again, as with the first mistake, it's likely to be a result of lifting too heavy, but this action places more emphasis on your trapezius muscles of the upper back rather than staying strict and lifting with the deltoid. Although the shoulder blade shouldn't be completely restricted of movement, there shouldn't be any excessive elevation of the shoulders during the exercise. Although the side lateral raise is generally suitable in a workout routine for people with any of the common health conditions, let's look at some that may consider the side lateral raise as a higher risk for them and where you may opt for an alternative exercise. Frozen shoulder will limit the amount of movement you have, meaning it may be too painful to perform this exercise as the movement is directly a shoulder joint action. Although the side lateral raise may be okay in the final stages of this condition, it might be wise to modify the exercise to a front raise with minimal weight, lifting the weight in the sagittal plane with the palms of the hands facing each other until your movement is restored pain-free. However, if it's very severe, you may eliminate a shoulder-specific exercise altogether. If you have a rotator cuff injury or are suffering with tendinopathy or bursitis in the shoulder, or even if you've experienced a shoulder dislocation, then you may have to adapt the exercise by increasing the amount of external rotation during the lift, meaning thumbs are up more, which will place more emphasis on the front head of the deltoid muscle. An alternative would be to limit the height at which you lift the weight, but again, as with the frozen shoulder, it may be more conservative to start with a front raise initially, or do some rotator cuff specific work within your pain-free range of movement before moving on to larger movement patterns of the shoulder joint. If you have osteoarthritis in the shoulder, this exercise may or may not be suitable for you, and it would be worth consulting your physical therapist for advice. Although movement should be encouraged, whether this movement is suitable will vary from person to person. If you've had a shoulder replacement, then always take the advice of your physiotherapist before adding this exercise to your weekly routine. Someone suffering with tennis elbow may find that this exercise exacerbates the pain. This is because the wrist extensor muscles have to remain isometrically contracted throughout the exercise to stop the wrist from buckling. An alternative would be to attach the weight to the wrist, such as using wrist weights instead of dumbbells, or attaching a cable to a wrist strap, or wrapping the resistance band around the wrist rather than holding the weight in the hand. If you suffer with polymyalgia rheumatica, then this exercise may exacerbate your symptoms, particularly if your shoulders are an area of the body that is affected by the condition. Work through any pain-free ranges of motion and keep the resistance light so the movement is more about maintaining mobility. If you have any type of neuropathy or nerve impingement in the arms that can affect your movement or grip, then just be sure to start conservatively and see how your body responds a day or two later. Again, start very light and then you can build up on this over time if it feels okay. Finally, if you suffer with a neurological condition or have had a stroke where you've been left with an impairment on one side of the body, then performing this exercise correctly may be a real challenge even without a weight. If the movement causes you pain or you've experienced a subluxation of the shoulder, then it would be wise not to do it. But if you just struggle with the motor control, then start without a weight to first train your brain of the movement pattern that you're trying to do and then build upon that. If your condition has affected your grip, then you can use a training aid such as that from Active Hands, which I'll leave a link to in the description below that will help you to focus on the movement and not worry about dropping the weight. Now let's look at some variations to spice up the movement a bit if you're bored of doing the standard side lateral raise. This will be by no means exhaustive, otherwise this video will be hours long, but it will hopefully spark some creativity in you by offering some ideas. First of all, you can perform single arm raises rather than doing them both together. This obviously focuses more emphasis on one side, but also challenges your stabilizing muscles in your core to stop you from tilting the torso to one side. After you've completed one set on one arm, switch to the other arm for the next set to see if there's an imbalance. This can be a great way of targeting the weaker side. Similarly, you could perform alternating side raises, meaning that you complete the rep with one arm before starting the next rep with the other. This can be good if your shoulders are balanced in terms of their strength, and again, will challenge the core muscles to maintain good posture throughout. A more difficult version of this one is to hold the non-moving arm in the position where it feels the peak resistance, while the other arm is doing the movement. This creates an isometric contraction for a few seconds before an isokinetic contraction for a similar time period and switch in between the two. So the muscle doesn't really get to rest or release tension. The next one may be a bit weird, but it's performing opposing side raises. This means while one arm is lifting the weight, the other arm is lowering the weight. It can feel a bit imbalanced and it's easy to lose control of the movement, so it would be considered a bit more advanced. If you want to increase the intensity without increasing the resistance or weight, then you can do pulses or partial reps at the point where the muscle is working hardest. In the case of the dumbbell, this is when the arm has been raised, so the pulses would be here at the top. If you're using a cable machine in the gym, then the hardest part will be much earlier in the movement, depending on the height of the cable outlet. So the pulses or partial reps could be done at the end of the set when you're struggling to lift the weight. I've used this variation myself when the weight I've used has been lighter, and for each raise I add on a pulse, so on the 10th rep I'm doing 9 additional pulses. And yes, it burns, in a good way though. If you've mastered the technique and you're strict with your form and have good core stability, then changing your base of support would be considered more challenging. This could be starting with the feet together to perform the exercise without making any of the mistakes mentioned earlier. It could be doing the exercise standing on one foot, or could even be doing it kneeling down if your knees can take it. You could use an air cushion, wobble board, or Bosu under your feet, or even trying one of these training aids but on one foot. You can now see how your focus would be distracted from the main exercise to ensure you maintain a good level of stability and balance, which naturally makes the exercise more challenging and more fun. I've even tried it with my eyes closed so I can improve the mind-body connection to really feel what I'm doing rather than just seeing it. And this can be another way to make it more challenging, especially with a reduced base of support. If you have access to a therapy band, resistance band, or looped rubber band, then this will offer a different experience to using a free weight. This is because gravity is not a factor in the exercise, and as the band stretches, so the resistance increases. However, the angle that the band is at to your arm and where it is anchored will still play a role into what part of the movement you will find it more challenging. More on this next. I think resistance bands are great for improving stability in the shoulder and are highly recommended as a warm-up with a lighter resistance or as a main exercise in a routine with a heavier resistance. The final modification you can make is changing the angle of resistance, and this is a bit more complicated as it will include some physics and biomechanics to explain it. If you're performing the side lateral raise with a dumbbell, then gravity acting on the weight means that the direction of force always acts straight down to the floor, meaning that the peak resistance will be felt when the arm is at the end of the motion, at shoulder height, when the arm is perpendicular to the ground. This is when the weight or direction of force is acting opposite to the direction of movement at that point. You'll therefore notice that at the start of the dumbbell side lateral raise, the weight doesn't act much against the movement as you begin to move your arms outwards while the weight still acts downwards. As the motion continues, the arms gradually transition from an outward movement to an upward one, and then the weight begins to act against it until reaching the peak at the top when the angle of the arm is around 90 degrees to the body. It's worth mentioning here that this is also the point when the weight is furthest away from the midline of the body, meaning it's at its longest lever where the weight is acting at its greatest on the shoulder joint. So we can change this by changing your body angle. If you were to lean to one side against a wall or on an incline bench in the gym with the opposing arm lifting the weight, you would reach the peak of the resistance much earlier in the movement. For example, around 45 degrees if your body angle was leaning around 45 degrees, or where the arm is again perpendicular to the ground, meaning more work is done in the middle of the movement rather than at the end. This does mean you can only do one arm at a time though. Another version is if you have access to a cable machine in a gym. You could place the cable height a bit lower than your hip height, where your hand would be when your arm is straight, and then by lifting the weight from here, the peak resistance is at the start of the movement, or 0 degrees, as the cable resistance is acting sideways and not downwards like a free weight. So the direction of force is already opposite to the direction of the movement as the arm begins the lift. This means that the exercise will feel hard at the start and much easier at the end of the movement, so the complete opposite of the standing dumbbell version. If you want to be really clever, then you can hold a cable handle and a small dumbbell in your hand at the same time, so as the resistance from the cable decreases, the resistance from the dumbbell increases, providing a more constant resistance throughout the movement. This isn't easy though, especially if your hands aren't very big. In addition, when using a cable machine, you can vary the height of the cable outlet to vary the point at where you feel the peak resistance. And you can also tinker with switching between having the cable in front of you and having the cable behind you to see if that feels any different. So essentially, if you have the opportunity to try out some of these variations, it will just challenge you in a different way. But always remember that you control the movement, don't let the resistance or weight control you. Let me know your thoughts on this breakdown and if it's something that helps you with your exercise routines. Also comment below if you want me to break down another popular exercise. But I hope this video provides you with some useful information. If so, please give it a like by clicking the thumbs up button below and consider subscribing if you haven't already. You can also check out the description below for ways that you can help support this channel. But thank you so much for watching, and remember to stay active and keep moving to feel better.